morning, and thank you very much for being here in this early morning. And I'm Jen-Hao Chen, and I'm currently an assistant professor at University of Missouri. And my training is that I'm a social demographer and a social epidemiologist. So today is that I'm going to talk about something a little bit different from yesterday's preventions, and which is about sleep. And I bet that most of you that have a little ideas of little knowledge about the sleep of the elderly. That's my own experience that I have been to many conferences, and I never find people that do the same topics as me. So to start with, I would just like to give you a little bit background about the sleep. Let me see how this works. No, it doesn't work. Let me see. Okay. Yeah, okay. I can just use the laptop. Okay, to start with I want to start with the process called the frailty process, which I think that many of you may have some ideas, may be familiar with. So as you know that as individual age, there's an increase of the regulations of the homeostasis. And it means that the increase of the physiological vulnerabilities of the bodies and the decline of the organ functions, and with age, with the increased organs and systems deregulations. So from the biological perspective, that you will find out that the deregulations of homeostasis increase with age. And what that means that when you look at individuals, and it means that the decline of the physical and cognitive functions as individual age. So you will find that the internal biological systems that the regulations increase, and you will find the older adults that their physical and cognitive function decline. And this is just an illustration of the frailty process that has been studied in biomedical science and in the biodemography. And how you should understand the sleep of older adults, that you can put it similar to what I just called the frailty process. And here is a nice picture that I got from the U.S. National Sleep Foundations. And it shows that how the sleep states, the internal neurological sleep state, change with people's age. So as you can see that as people age, you will see the decrease of the REM, which means the rapid eye movement sleep. That is a name just similar to what is called by deep sleep. So as individual age and move to old age, the deep sleep stage decrease. And you will see that older adults, they are more likely to awake during the night, and their sleep are less likely to be consolidated in a continuous segment, and it may be more fragmented. So that's the evidence that from the neurological studies. With age, our sleep structure and what sleep science calls sleep architectures also becomes more fragile. So what it reflects in the data in your observations is that if you look at, you survey that the sleep states that over the life course, you will find out that older adults are more likely to have insufficient sleep, and which is defined as less than 6 hours of sleep during the night. And a recent US surveys that say that 1/4 of older adults have less than 6 hours of sleep. And they also, because of the fragmentations of sleep, they are more likely to show insomnia symptoms. Nearly half of the older adults have at least one insomnia symptoms, and 40% of older adults say that they have trouble falling asleep. So as you see, that this really mimic the frailty process that I have just shown, the internal change of the neurological systems that in your body, and which reflects that in the observation data that we find. So for poor sleep, that it's as, if you think about it as indicators of the frailties that of the internal body, internal biological systems, it do has a significant consequence that on older adults. And poor sleep has been shown that in epidemiological data have been linked to mortalities that of the older adults, and also has been linked to the chronic disease, increased chance of the chronic disease of older adults. And this evidence that both comes from the quantity, which is the durations of the sleep, and the quality, which is the insomnia symptoms of the sleep. So from the medical and epidemiological studies, we do find out that poor sleep that reflects some things like the frailty indicators that we see before. Okay, so right now that so far I have been talking about a little bit backgrounds of sleep. But one thing that we have not yet quite understand about the frailties of sleep in old age is about that the current evidence and the current studies of sleep are mostly driven from the biomedical science and neurological science. So we have an understanding of the increasing malleabilities of the biological system and neurological systems that would cause the decline of the sleep problem. But on the other hand, we have little ideas about how the social factor, the social risk factors that may also put older adults that are at the risk of the poor sleep. And that's why that I come to these studies, that as a social demographer and as a social epidemiologist, I'm interested in that with the increasing malleabilities that of the neurological systems that cause people poor sleep, and what social factors maybe impede or facilitate the process and make older adults more likely to sleep poorly. And for these studies, that one of the factors that I'm focusing on right now is the economic hardship, the properties. And there's a wealth of literature that in social and economic science, and they find out that the economic well-being that is an influential factor for the health of the older adults. And also that from the life course perspective, that if you look at the economic well-being that from birth to death, and older adults, when people transition to old age, a couple of life course transitions that may make older adults that are more likely to become poor. So because of this, that I will think about that this challenge, the challenges to have a securities that in terms of finance at old age may be a challenge for older adults to maintain the good sleep. And here I just talk a little bit about what's some of the plausible reasons that why you think that the economic hardship, the properties that can affect the sleep of the elderly. And when I think about this, I conceptualize that how economic hardship property can affect sleep that in two big broad ways. The first is that sleep is, of course, is a biological process, but individuals that to some extent can determine their sleep, not all, but in some part. And the most of the parts that people can determine is that what times they are going to sleep, and that will affect that how amount of sleep that they have. And in this part, that economic theories that have all think about that, how sleeps that can be determined as individual decisions that in terms of time allocations. And if you think this ways, that you can think about that the opportunity cost of sleeps that when people are poor, it's probably relatively cheap as compared to doing other kinds of leisure activities. So you would expect that people will sleep most that when they have less economic resource. And aside from the economic perspectives, that from a more demographic perspective, that how you sleep that is not only a decision that within individuals and weighted between the opportunity cost of all activities, and it's also about the negotiations that within the social relationships, that especially that within the families. So the social roles you have and the social structure positions that you occupy, that may also have an influence on how you can sleep and what times that you can sleep. And for the demographic literatures, that they often find out that older adults that in poor and in lower economic status, they often are in complex household and in difficult like the social relationships, and that may also make them less likely to negotiate good sleep that for themselves. And from a more psychological perspective, then how properties and economic hardships that can affect sleep, and you can think about properties that as stressors. And many of you that sit here may be economists. So for economists, that you will know that skills begets skills. If you get non-cognitive skills, then it begets that cognitive skills. And for here, the stress is the same thing. Stress also begets stress. If you stress in one part, and it may be also stressful in your family size, in other sides. So properties as stressors, and the stress can proliferate over time. And the stress that can also affect the hormones and the physiological process, and that in turn that affects sleep, especially the quality aspects of the sleep. Okay, so because that I assume that many of you do not have a lot of background on sleep, so I spend a little bit more time on giving you about the background and information of sleep. And now that I turn to the data and the more analytical part of the study. And these studies that I relies on data called the panel studies of income dynamics, the PSID. And it's a really studies that have a long history that in the United States is a longitudinal and panel studies that start in 1968 that with 5,000 families, and it followed it annually before 1997 and biannually after that. And in 2013, the PSID studies that add a supplements that called the disability and the use of time supplements, which is, I call it DAST. And it includes older adults that which is 60 years or old or older as of December 31st, 2012, and in their sample. And the sample I got is 16,093 older adults here. And what's unique in these DAST studies that it includes time use modules that of these older adults. So time use studies has been used by economics to study the labor activities and non-labor activities, and also been studied by the family and gender scholar to study the divisions of labor. And right now that I'm going to use the time use studies to help me understand the sleep behaviors that of the older adults. And in the DAST, that each older adult that was asked to complete 2 time diaries, and it's 2 24-hour time diary, and 1 on randomly select weekday and 1 on randomly select weekend day. And the day starts from the 4 a.m. of the day and follow for 24 hours to ask about detail about the activities that older adult did that during that day. And it used the same codes that from the American Time Use Survey, but for each older adults that they get to time diaries. And from these time diaries that I construct two indicators that of sleep problems. The first one is I called insufficient sleep, and which defines as less than 6 hours of sleep. And how I construct this insufficient sleep is that I focus on the longest sleep episodes that has been reported in the time diaries. And I coded that, translated that into the dummy variables. And also that if an older adult report sleep that in time diaries, and there's a follow-up questions, ask older adults that did it take you more than half an hour to fall asleep, and it's a yes/no question. And for the measure of the economic hardships and poverties that I link the data that to the main PSID. And here that I define that two poverty indicators that based on the total family income. And the first one is the current poverty, which is the 2013 survey years. And here I used to cut a point. I use a 100% federal poverty line and the 133% federal poverty line. And that is the eligibilities, that cutoff points that for some of the social welfare programs that in the United States. And for the results that I'm going to present, that I use the 133% cutoff point. And also, in addition to the current poverty, I also can trace the long-term poverties that of older adults. And because it's a longitudinal surveys that I can basically date back to about 1960s. But for the purpose of these studies that I use the 5 years cutoff points as the long-term poverties. And so I trace back to 2009. And approximately about 8% that of older adults are considered long-term poverties that using my definitions. And so my analytical strategies is that I first start with the multi-label models. And I got two types of multi-label models. And the first model one, the equation one, estimate the associations that between current poverties and the sleep outcomes of older adult. And the equation two that estimates the influence of the long-term poverties on older adults. And please keep in mind that for long-term poverties, because I trace back to the poverty histories of older adults over the 5 years. And so there's a couple of many combinations of possible poverty treatment solution here. So it's not just a dummy variable here. And okay. And in addition that to the original multi-label models, that because that in the PSIDs that I have a wealth of the social demographic information of individual, so I try to do a little bit more by applying the counterfactual models that to help me estimate the effect and the associations between poverties and the sleep. And because I will be able to specify the propensities of falling in poverties at old age using the PSID data. So I used the inverse probability treatment weight. And for the long-term poverties, that I use the marginal structural models, that which is the multiplies that of the inverse probability treatment weights that at each treatment period. So in that sense, that if I would trace back that to the older adults poverty histories that back to 5 year periods, then I will have 3 major data points that give me about 8 poverty treatment history regions here. And for constructing the propensity scores that instead of using the traditional logistic models, that I use the classifications and regression tree techniques that help me estimate the propensity scores. And for the traditionals that logistic models that you need to have to get the functional form right, and you need to have get the interactions and everything right. And if the assumption fails, then the propensity score that may not be accurate. So instead, I used the Descartes approach, and which is a machine learning approach. And it recursively partitions the data space and fit in the simple prediction models that we see in each partitions. And so the partitions does not require any parametric assumptions and any functional forms assumptions of prediction models. So that will be better that in terms of getting the propensity score right. And for the current study, I use about 15,000 iterations to get the propensity score balance. And also for propensity score, I use the stabilized ways that could increase the efficiencies of my estimate. And then after I construct the propensity scores, then I went back, I got the weight, and I went back to the multi-label models that I originally have. Okay, then here is a summary of the results on the associations between current properties and sleep problems. And I separate my results by weekday diaries and weekend diaries. And I show results for 3 models, and the first is unadjusted model, and the second is the regression adjusted model, which is the simple multi-label regression. And the third is the ITPW weighted models, which is weighted on the regression adjusted models. So as you can first see that in the unadjusted models, that you see that current properties was associated with both the chance of increasing insufficient sleep and the increased chance of difficulty falling asleep. But when you move to the regression adjusted models and the associations that for the insufficient sleep, that becomes non-significant, and the difficult sleep that it remains significant, but it's dropped a little bit. And after that, I applied the ITPW weight, and the coefficients that for the difficulty falling asleep drop a little bit more, and now it only falls that in the marginal significant area. And for the weekend diaries, that basically is that I find a very similar patterns here. For the unadjusted models, that it has strong associations here. But after that, I moved to the regression adjusted models and the ITPW models, that the coefficients that drop about that half, but it remains statistically significant. And here's again the results that for the long-term property and the sleep problems. And for the long-term properties, that because that I have 8 treatment routines here, so for simplicities that I only shows that the results of continuously exposure to properties, and I do not show the results for other kinds of treatment routines combinations. So, but you should keep in mind that they are not, this is not just dummy variables, it's a series of treatment routines out here. And as you can see is that for unadjusted models, that it again show the same patterns, that long-term exposure to properties is associated with insufficient sleep and difficulty falling asleep. And after applying the ITPW models, and the coefficient drop, and it becomes marginal significance. And for the weekday diaries, I still see strong associations that when unadjusted, but however, that the associations that was gone that after apply the ITPW models. And here is a quick summary of what I find about the effect size that for the difficulty falling asleep, which is the part that I find the statistical significance, that for current properties and for the continuous exposure that properties over the 5 years, and for weekday and weekend diaries. And you can find out that for current properties, it's about 40% that increase chance of difficulty falling asleep. And for long-term exposures of practice, it's about 60% increase in odds ratios of difficulty falling asleep. And so what's the implications of my findings? The first is that I find that consistent that patterns that for weekdays and weekend days that diaries. And I would like to say that this is not the artificial results of the survey design, because that the PSID survey, they asked the time diaries that for 2 days on 2 separate days. They do not do it on the same time. So it's not the results that of the survey design. So and I would say that it will probably shows that the first, that the effect, the role, the influence of properties on older adult sleep that do not change very much that during the periods up to diary surveys. And also it can be means that the influence of property on older adult sleep that is quite consistent and quite persistent that over time. And the second is that I find that stronger effects that on the difficulty falling asleep, but I find no associations on insufficient sleep. And one of the reasons that for this may be the coping strategies that of older adults. And older adults may try to maintain the normal sleep schedules and the behaviors that when the face of economic hardship. And when I further do additional analysis and to analyze the data by look at the sleep time and sleep durations, that I do find that it's probably the case here. If I only look at the sleep durations, I find that there's small positive effects that older adult shifts that to increase more times that in sleep. But however, that the coping strategies may be less likely to work when you try to fall asleep, because that it may get difficult for you to control how much time you need to fall asleep instead for you to control for how many times that you can sleep on the bed and at what time you go to bed and what time you wake up in the morning. And of course, there are some limitations that of this study, and I just list some of this. And the dust is not a representative data, so the results that could not be make inference that to the older adults that in the United States. And the income information and property information is not available between the 2 interview year surveys. So that's one of the unfortunate part of the PSID after they shift to the biennial survey. And there's some measurement errors that of the sleep indicators that possibly, and also finally that because I relies on the ITPW, so there's a possibilities that the ignorability assumptions that may not fall. But I try to control for, I try to use as many as information to construct my preference score, so I hope that will reduce the chance that ignorability assumption fall. So this study is what I say to aid to the understandings of the determinant of the sleep from a more social, demographic, and epidemiological perspectives, and to let us think about that another important aspects of the frailty process at old age, which is the frailty of sleep. And as now that many government organizations and public health organizations begin to pay attention to the sleep health of older adults, I think that these studies also have some implications of the practice and the programs that help aim to improve the sleep health at old age. And what I find is that I find that probably has no effect on insufficient sleep, but can reduce the older adults' ability to initiate sleep, and effects for both long-term and long-term property, and for both weekend and weekdays. So finally, is that I want to end up with the overall implications of my study. Of course, I think that now is too early to say that what's the policy or even exact program implications of these studies. But for long histories, that sleep health that has been the domains of the medical science and biological science. And when think about the practice of programs that try to promote sleep health in old age, and people always come up with the ideas about a more medical approach or even a neurological approach. And my studies that I try to do is that I want to let people know that the social and environmental aspects that is also important that in shaping the sleep in old age. And so if we think about that, a more integrated approach to promote sleep health will be incorporated by a medical approach and a social health policy approach that help to improve the sleep health of the older adults. Okay, and finally, that I want to thank the NIH that funded my study, and thank you very much, and I welcome for your comments and suggestions.